So now we're going to try to present the data in a way that it's nice to look at for someone else. So explanatory data visualization. And we're going to work with the task you completed last. So we are going to visualize the answer to the question whether test prep actually has an effect on the final scores for math, reading, and writing. We are again jumping into pivot table. And we're going to make a pivot chart, though you should know that normal charts that are not hanging on the pivot tables are very similar, and how to make them is rather similar, but we'll have a brief look at that in a second. So let's call it chart test prep, and I have a bunch of other things here that reappeared, which is not necessary. So I will arrange it nicely. We have our test prep here. Again, when we're creating a pivot table, first thing, we need to think what would be a nice way to look at it. So you saw in one of the previous videos that it's quite common to represent the means by bar charts. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we will have test. This is what you should be imagining in your head, and we will have, let's say, yes and no. And here we'll have math. Here we'll have math, writing, and here will be our values that will fill in. And once we have it done, we have a nice overview of our means, and then we can create a chart out of it. So let's replicate what technically you should be imagining in your head in pivot tables. We want to have our test prep. We can put it in the columns. Let's put it in the rows, that might be even better. And let's throw in oh no, that looks not so good. Let's do it like this, and we killed our table. And here is the reading score and the writing score. And we have some nonsensical numbers here. That's because Excel took a sum. Let's change it into average, and let's make sure that we have a nice neat number with 1 decimal point after comma. Average again. We go format number. Twice, okay, and the last funky number that we have here, average number, format number, 1 number after comma. There we have it. Let's remove this. This is not helping us anymore. So here's what we have, and we also have grand total, which is nice if we're just looking at the numbers, because we can see, okay, test prep, yes, no, and average across both groups is 66, which is somehow between these two groups. Makes sense. We don't really need the grand totals here, so we are going to remove them by going into the design tab and removing grand totals. So as you see, sometimes I have to jump around and try to find things that means that I don't always remember where things are, which is fine, and you shouldn't either. Excel is rather intuitive, so all you need to do is realize what it can do and then try to find the right button. Of course, the buttons that you would use most frequently, you will remember their location. So now we have this table here, and to create a chart, we highlight this table. Because it's pivot table, we actually can just stand on any level or highlight the whole thing, doesn't matter. Highlighting the whole thing is only relevant if you're working with non-formatted data, so not a table, not a pivot table. And then we go into analyze, and here's our pivot chart, and it suggests us an option. Let's just click on it. It's a bar chart, and there we go. So we have this chart here, and we have yeses and nos. So generally it kind of looks like, yeah, test prep is effective and there are numbers of different scores. It's not very user-friendly. I'd rather have a section for each subject and then have a yes and no colored. To do that, should I restructure my entire pivot table? I could, but there is a faster way as well. We can just flip the table, switch rows and columns here in the design. We switch it and there we go. And you can also see that the table here switched as well, which is nice on the one hand side. On the other hand side, very important to remember. When you're playing with the pivot table and you have a chart attached to it, this chart will be changing as the table changes. If you play with the chart and you do something here, the chances are, like we flipped now, the table will flip as well. So there is a good and a bad to it, depending on what you're doing. So now let's make our chart nice. These buttons here, not really pretty to my taste, so we're going to right click and see if we can do something about it. And here it looks like hide the button, and all the buttons are hidden. Here we hide the button as well, and this one we don't need either. That's already nicer. Now, does our chart show a nice picture? It looks like the differences are huge. Well, in fact, it is something. It's 15 points or something like this, but really, let's not forget that our scores are not measured from 58 to 76. They are measured from 0 to 100. So to have a truthful graphical representation so that our effects are not blown up, we need to adjust our scale to its actual range. We step on a scale, right click and say Format Axis. And we start here in this window and say minimum is 0 and maximum is 100. This 100. And you see it already adjusted. So now, yeah, we see the differences, but considering the scale, they don't look so disproportionately huge as before. When you step on the axis, you will see also that you can change the step of the major, but 10 here is okay, and a bunch of other things that you can play around. So let's focus on the chart. What else is missing? We are creating, let's not forget, we're creating an explanatory chart. That means that we should create something that is kind of explains the whole situation that we have, ideally also with the minimum help from a researcher. So you're trying to create this so that you don't have to explain too much of what was going on. Let's make it, in this notion, let's not forget to give a name to a chart so that when a person who you present information to looks at the chart and starts maybe browsing through and trying to see what's going on here, has a clear idea, this is what the chart is about. So we have this design button here, and here we have add chart elements, and all kinds of pretty things will be appearing here, like chart title. And let's name it something short, but also so that it says exactly what's going on. So let's say something like this. That's not an ideal name, but something I could quickly come up on the spot. In general, you should think those through, especially considering that sometimes you're presenting things and people might be not listening to you, but looking at what you have in the slides. Some other times you will send a report, and there it's even more important that things are very intuitive from one glance. So what do we have on this axis? Let's also make it pretty and not forget the name for it. We're still on the elements. Let's name y-axis because the x-axis is kind of intuitive, but we'll roll back to it in a second. And here we have score, and that's score mean, so that's what we'll call it, score mean per category. So this average of math, blah blah blah, average of reading, writing, that's not so pretty. We can change it here in the pivot. If you remember, if you press F2, you can start editing the names in the pivot. So let's remove this average, and instead of underscore add space. The same way F2 for the second cell here, removing average off, removing underscore and pressing space, and the third time around F2, removing everything that we don't need, and it updated automatically. So what else would be nice to have? Well, generally now our memes are not so overblown, and especially if I'm interested in the writing score, it might be not so convenient to go and drag my mouse and try to see, where's the score actually? So let's produce the mean values also here in the bar chart. We go back to the design tab and add this element as well. These are data labels. It's up to you where to place them. I like to place them in the middle. And here we have them. So now I can see, this is higher than this, and I also have the numbers. What else is missing? What is very important when we're looking at the means is the sample size, because it will tell us how reliable means actually is. We know already, and you did this exercise before, that our sample size is 1,000. We have 1,000 participants in our student score data. So let's go and insert this box. It's just a box that we can insert here manually. So we're in the insert button, we're standing on our chart, and we insert the text button right about here, and we'll write n equals 1,000. You see the color is a little bit different in this text, so you might consider making it a little bit grayish so that it looks like the other text we have. So this seems about right. And let's drag it a little bit so that it doesn't look so crowded. So there we have our sample. If I don't like these colors, it could be that they don't fit your presentation design, or you generally don't like it like I hear, or you want to make colors more intuitive to what they actually represent, you might change the colors as well. So let's step on the blue bars. It's in the format, and we can say shade, fill, and let's say gray, because usually no means something irrelevant, so we make it gray. And yes, let's make it dark blue. Well, the problem here now is that we cannot see the numbers of our means anymore. So what do we do now? We step on a text. We go on a home button, and let's make it white. And maybe let's make it bold as well, so that it's really popping. And we can make the gray button a little bit darker, so that all the numbers are white here as well. Now let's step on these numbers here. White color and also bold. So here are a couple of things that you can do. This is already a very nice chart. If I'm looking at it, I already have all the information that is necessary. I don't need too much of an additional story to it. Now, I told you that if you change something here in the pivot table, it would change in the chart as well. The good side of it is that we can actually make it a little bit dynamic. So for example, we can add a slicer. And let's say I also want to see what's happening by gender. So now I created the gender button. How does it work? If I step on female, I only see the results for females. If I step on males, only for males. If I cancel the filter again, I see both. This is not very neat, so let's try to change this one so that it looks nicely as well. I made it gray just now. Let's right click and see if we can remove some of the things that are unnecessary. Slicer settings seems about right. We have a header display here. We don't need a header display because it's quite clear if we have males and females what actually the whole thing is about. So we click OK. Let's make it a little bit smaller, and we can put this button here. Let's make a border for this one as well so that it looks nicely together with the other one. Let's say looks gray, so let's say this one's gray as well, and it looks much thicker than the one for the button, so let's change it to a thinner one. Now it looks more like it. So we have a button and the whole thing here, and we have a nice neat chart. So this is already something where we have a dynamic story going on. And I will add a link to the video where you can see how you can actually create a whole dashboard in Excel. It's not something that you most likely will do, but it's really nice to know that you can do it in case you need to. So please check out this video. It's just 15 minutes and goes very quickly, and you don't need to repeat after the video. The important thing is to see how powerful Excel can actually be. What I also mentioned is that we can also create charts without a pivot table. So let's say we have this table here, just as a table. This is the data we already have. You see, it's not a pivot table anymore, just a table. So here, as I said before, you need to highlight the whole thing, and then if you go on the Insert tab, you see we have all kinds of charts in here. And you can see what Excel will recommend you, but we know bar chart will be nice here. So we select this one, and here we can then do pretty much all the same things that we did with this chart, color changing and so on and so forth. And this chart hangs on this data, so of course if you start changing things here, they will change in the chart. See, this thing popped up. Let's roll it back. Other than that, it's no difference. This is exactly the plugin that you would have in PowerPoint if you want to create a chart in PowerPoint right away. So the differences are only this chart is hanging on this table, and if you change this little table, the whole chart will change. You will be less tempted to change this table than the pivot one. The pivot one is more dynamic, so there is a plus and a minus to that. All in all, the goal is to create a chart that is intuitive. So from one glance, a person who has no idea what you're talking about has to figure out what is going on, ideally with minimal or no help from you besides the chart itself. So try to recreate this thing yourself. This is a skill that you should have at least on the basic level. Check out the links that I left below if you struggle with the charts, and make sure that you have some mastery of this skill by the time of preparation of the final presentation for this course. You will definitely need it there.